In the political theater of post-colonial Africa, a certain man has always emerged. The man who comes from nothing, speaks the language of the people, and promises to undo the sins of the political elite by becoming their antithesis. For the people of Kenya, William Ruto was such a man, or at least he seemed to be. In a Kenya divided not just by ethnicity but by class, William Ruto emerged as a disruptor.
A village boy has become the president of Kenya.
A self-styled son of the soil, he positioned himself against the old guard, against dynasties, privilege, and inherited entitlement. He did not offer abstract visions, but offered bread, hustle, and a future. But the myth has since unraveled. In less than 3 years, William Ruto's name has shifted from rallying cry to rally target. His story, which was once the embodiment of Kenya's collective ambition, now haunts a public that feels betrayed. This is the anatomy of political disillusionment in modern Kenya. It is the story of a man, a movement, and a nation that dared to believe only to be dragged back to earth by debt, taxation, and broken promises. In 2022, William Ruto achieved what few believed possible. He rose to power not by aligning with the state, but by confronting it.
Mr. President, please, stop talking about me. Talk about your candidate.
His narrative was carefully constructed. A boy who sold chickens in the Rift Valley, who rose through the system not with a silver spoon, but with grit. His bottom-up economic model was not just policy, it was identity. He framed the ordinary Kenyan as the engine of economic growth, not just the beneficiary of trickle-down theory. For the first time in decades, a politician spoke to the matatu driver, the street hawker, and the jobless graduate not as voters, but as stakeholders. His opponent, Raila Odinga, backed by sitting President Uhuru Kenyatta, represented the elite class, but Ruto turned that alliance into a liability. The hustler versus dynasty dichotomy became not just rhetoric, but revolution. History has never been kind to populists who ascend without a plan to sustain the promises that brought them into power. Upon assuming office, Ruto inherited a delicate economy, one inflated by debt, weakened by COVID, and weighed down by global fuel shocks. But instead of cushioning the impact, he lifted subsidies on maize flour, electricity, and fuel within weeks of taking power. His rationale was economic realism. Kenya's fiscal deficit was unsustainable, and the subsidies, as he claimed, were a trap. And yet, the political optics were catastrophic. The common mwananchi, the very hustlers he championed, found themselves squeezed harder than ever before. Matatu fares rose, ugali became a luxury, and the belief that the president still remembered the grind of poverty began to wither. What emerged was not a new economic order, but the old cycle of austerity legitimized by the IMF and paid for by the poor. In June 2023, the Finance Act was passed, and with it, the government crossed a line.
Tonight, Kenyans are bracing for tough times ahead after President William Ruto signed into law the controversial Finance Bill 2023, inherently instituting punitive taxation measures on Kenyans starting next month, which is July.
The bill introduced a 1.5% housing levy on gross salaries, increased VAT on fuel to 16%, and added taxes on digital content, remittances, and online services. It was fiscal overreach under the guise of reform. While the government argued the act would spur affordable housing and long-term revenue, most Kenyans saw it as a direct assault on disposable income. It wasn't just economists who sounded the alarm. Civil servants, creatives, and even border unions joined the outcry. The protests that followed, which were dubbed Maandamano, were not just mere political theater. They were existential. Raila Odinga led the charge, but the anger transcended party lines. For the first time since 2008, Kenya faced the spectre of sustained mass action in peacetime. The Finance Act was no longer policy, it was symbolism, the end of the hustler dream. What happened next was a test not just of governance, but of morality.
Today's events mark a critical turning point on how we respond to grave threats to our national security.
Police responded to demonstrators with batons, bullets, and blanket force. By July, Amnesty International had documented over 30 civilian deaths. Young people were abducted, journalists harassed, and civil liberties suspended in practice, if not in law. William Ruto, once a vocal critic of police brutality, now presided over it. In the same streets where he once rallied the disenfranchised, now lay the bodies of those who dared to speak up. In Ruto's traditional strongholds like Kisii and Eldoret, residents spoke of betrayal, not just disappointment. In the mosques of Mombasa and the churches of Kiambu, clerics asked the same question: where is the man we voted for? For many people, the answer was simple: he was never that man to begin with. Abroad, President Ruto crafted a different persona. He was Africa's digital reformer, a green energy evangelist, and a Pan-African statesman. But the contrast between his global persona and domestic reality became glaring. As Kenyans protested rising taxes, Ruto toured capitals from Washington to Paris. Critics began counting his trips, more than 40 in under 2 years. Each journey was framed as diplomacy, but to many back home, it became a metaphor. Their president was always elsewhere. The irony was bitter. In a nation burdened by debt, the government announced plans for new luxury vehicles and increased allocations for state house hospitality. The carefully crafted hustler image was now untenable. What emerged was not a champion for the poor, but a president accused of forgetting the poor. Kenya today stands at an inflection point. Ruto's presidency is not over. He retains control of parliament. The economy, though strained, has not yet collapsed. Foreign creditors remain cautiously optimistic, but legitimacy, once lost, is harder to regain than any rating. Among the youth, especially urban first-time voters, the sentiment is clear. This was their last vote cast in faith. In 2022, they hoped, but in 2025, they resist. And that resistance may define the legacy of William Ruto, not what he did in office, but the trust he failed to protect. The hustler president now stands accused of becoming what he vowed to defeat. Whether he writes a new chapter or is written out of history by disillusionment remains to be seen.